All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good friend Bryce Covert. Bryce is a writer for The Nation magazine and the economic policy editor at Think Progress, all of which you can find at brycecovert.com. You can also follow Bryce on Twitter at Bryce Covert. Bryce, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you for having me back on.
All right, so Bryce, you recently wrote a piece for The Nation magazine called What Amazon Does Not Understand About Overwork. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of your listeners will probably have read the big New York Times expose that came out, I think it was last month, on Amazon's work culture. And it's important to know that we're talking about its corporate work culture because we had already read exposés elsewhere about what it's like to work inside of its warehouses as contract workers, grueling, horrible conditions. But it turns out that also sort of permeates the working conditions that people face in the white-collar jobs at headquarters. People described working so hard they got ulcers, being shamed for taking time off for cancer treatments, people crying at their desks regularly. I was really struck by a quote also from Jeff Bezos, the CEO. He said in 1997, "You can work long, hard, or smart, but at Amazon.com, you can't choose 2 out of 3. So it's this culture of pushing people ever and ever closer to their edge. Basically, it sounds like they're fine having people go so far over the edge that they drop off, as long as they're squeezing as much as they can out of those employees while they're employed at Amazon. They have these regular cullings so that they are regularly firing people anyway. So their philosophy seems to be not one of retention, but of using turnover as almost a incentive to work harder.
Yeah, the article is unbelievably frightening and just kind of, I guess in some ways it's better that it's also the white collar people and not just the people in the factories. But I mean, we don't want anybody to be abused here, but it really is sort of crazy how much abuse is put upon the white collar workers there.
Right, and so one of the things I wrote about, though, is that this idea of pushing people to work as hard and long as they possibly can to get the most out of them actually doesn't really square with what we know about how people perform well. That all of research, and you can think of Henry Ford, right, who realized that capping a worker's week actually makes them more productive. And so science again and again shows that this is true, that if you push yourself beyond, say 40 or 50 hours a week, you will get a small boost of productivity, but it's ephemeral and then it's gone. And you start performing worse than if you had just kept working steadily at a more humane amount of hours. So, what's troubling, though, is that it's not just Amazon, right? I mean,
right.
I think when we read this expose about Amazon in the Times, it certainly seems to be one of the most extreme ends, but a lot of workplaces are moving this way. We have lots of data showing that Americans are working longer and harder, that we work harder than many other people in developed countries across the world. And so it seems to be that employers are pushing people further and further, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be more and more productive. In fact, it may mean we just burn out more and more and have more health issues.
Yeah, I mean, in the article, you write about how statistics actually show that countries that put in the least time are generally more productive than the countries that put in more time, correct?
Right. There is science showing that those that put in the least time at work are much more productive. Germany, for example, does not put in that many hours at work. We think of Germany as being this sort of austere place where everybody has these hard work ethics, but they actually spend less time in the job and get more done than, say, a country like Greece, where people are spending more time on the job but getting less done. So, it's true on a country-to-country level, and it's also true on a person-to-person level. The people putting in more time at work aren't necessarily being the most productive. And so what you're doing is you're just putting in hours either to prove to the boss that you're there or because your boss is requiring you to, but you're only hurting yourself and not helping your company.
What is the reason? Because again, the science shows this, other countries show this. Is one of the main reasons the fact that jobs are actually harder to come by, and so companies feel that they can kind of churn and burn people out and then just pop someone through? Is that one of the kind of reasons that companies are going after this? Is like they don't feel they need to actually invest in the long-term care of their employees anymore?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what's going on. Like I said, at Amazon, it becomes clear in this piece that their strategy is not one of retention. A lot of companies try to invest in their employees and keep them around because it costs a lot to replace someone. You lose their expertise. Amazon doesn't work that way. Amazon appears to be totally fine with squeezing out as much work as possible in a short amount of time from someone, and then if they can't keep up, just letting them go. And I think more and more companies are acting that way, rather than seeing employees as things that you invest in for the long term to get better returns out of. They see you as sort of a short-term cog in the machine that they want to get the maximum out of, and then if you leave, you are expendable. In an economy like ours, where we've been in a tough economy for a long time, we had the recession, then a very slow recovery. We're just starting to come out of it in terms of jobs. But for a long time, there were so many people vying for each job opening that the second you opened up a job and started looking, you could have 7 people knocking down your door trying to get that job. So workers became replaceable, and I think, therefore, expendable in a lot of companies' minds. That may change. That may change now that the labor market is tighter. There are more people finding work, so that could put pressure on companies to stop sort of this burn and churn. But workers also have very little power in this economy to make demands against their employers. So it still may be that we all feel vulnerable and replaceable.
Yeah, I mean, and also, obviously, the shift of the decline of unions in the United States, the power really has shifted very, very much toward the employer and away from the employees.
Right, yeah. I mean, we used to have huge numbers of people in unions, enough, I think, even if everyone wasn't in a union, those unions really influenced the way workplace standards were created, the way everybody worked. Unions just don't have the same power anymore. We've reached decade lows in terms of how many people are represented by one. And it's not the only way to have power at work, but it is one of the clearest, most effective ways for workers to have power against their bosses. It doesn't necessarily mean you can make all the demands you want, but at least you have a voice at work, and that voice is on the decline. And I don't see a lot of other means by which workers are being granted any kind of power in the workplace to push for, higher pay as well as, better working conditions, so they're not working these crazy work weeks.